All right. Hey, hello, everybody. Welcome to Monster Monday for March 15th, 2021. I am your host, DM Galabon. And behind my voice right now, you are hearing the tones of Stream Beats, copyright-free music by Harris Heller, who is a gamer, made for gamers, for streamers. You'll never have a copyright strike against you if you use Stream Beats on your streams or your YouTube videos. Now, tonight on Monster Monday, we are doing something very special. We are starting a mini-series. And this is a mini-series on Monster Monday that I like to call The History of Goblins. So tonight we are doing the History of Goblins Part 1. And the focus of tonight is to talk about goblins proper, that particular monster, and how that monster has evolved throughout the various editions of D&D. Where they came from, what the ideas of the designers were, things that are actual, like I said, proper goblins. Then in future weeks, as we get towards the end of the night, we'll preview a little bit what all is to come. Now, there's a couple of reasons I did that. Number one is that goblins are so prolific and so rich and so rife, not only within D&D, but within other intellectual properties. And one of the episodes that we will look at is we will look at how you can bring in lore from goblins from other IPs to inform your game at your table. It's something that I've done, and my players seem to like it. So you should feel free to go ahead and do that. All right. As always, before we get started, we want to have a big shout out over to Mo at the tabletopbellhop.com. He is the OG when it comes to all things tabletop games. Board games, party games, card games, tabletop RPGs, you name it. He's got links to everything from industry news, reviews of games, how to buy the games, people talking about rules changes to the games, people talking about the lore of the games, people talking about the history of the games, people doing streams of playing the games. So anything that you want to know about tabletop games, their theory, the industry, whatever, go to Mo at the tabletopbellhop.com. All right, now we're going to dive right into our discussion of goblins. Now, as I said, this is goblins proper. So, what is a goblin? Well, everybody kind of has an idea of a goblin, but we are pulling straight out of the description from the first appearance of goblins, way back in the original rules. So goblins are a humanoid race, small, 3.5 to 4.5 feet tall, and very ugly by human standards. They have pointed ears and misshapen teeth. Their skin is a pale, earthy color such as chalky tan or livid gray. Their eyes are red and glow when there is little light. Now, keep that description in mind, because goblins evolve. Description you get in original rules isn't necessarily the same description you see later on in other editions. So, what about the lore of goblins? Goblins occupy an uneasy place in a dangerous world. They react by lashing out at any creatures they believe they can bully. They are very predictable in the sense that they are very reactionary. You poke the goblin is going to lash out until it thinks it's overpowered. Then it's going to run away. That's just what goblins do. They're cunning in battle and cruel in victory. Goblins are fawning and servile in defeat. Just as in their own society, lower castes must scrape before those of greater status, and as goblin tribes bow before other goblinoids. We're going to kind of mention other goblinoids in passing tonight, those mainly being bugbears and hobgoblins. There are a few other esoteric, rarer types of goblinoids out there that we'll talk about, but those are the two main ones that you will run into. But we're not really going to focus on those creatures that much tonight. All right, so what kind of creature are they? Well, we just talked about it in the description of goblins. They are, of course, humanoids. And humanoids are the main people groups of the D&D world, both civilized and savage. And all of the playable races in D&D, I think all of the playable races in D&D are humanoids. I'm almost certain they all are. Can't recall whether Aasimar and centaurs are considered humanoids. They might be. But practically, if it has 2 arms, 2 legs, and a physical form, and it walks upright, it's probably a humanoid. That's sort of what D&D, unless it's a giant. Or unless it's a construct. But even then, Warforged are considered humanoids, not constructs. So, there we go. But anyway, all that aside, goblins fall into that humanoid creature type. Okay, now here is where we are going to spend the bulk of our time tonight. Is we are going to spend most of the evening tonight in this episode looking at goblins as they come from the various different editions of the game. So let's jump right into the rule cyclopedia, all the way back from original D&D, and we will see what goblins were like when they first entered the game. So they have armor class 6, which is kind of middle of the road. It's not great. It's not horrible. Kind of average. Hit dice 1-1, so basically 7 hit points, because monster hit dice were mainly 1d8. The move is 90 feet. 90 feet in a non-combat round or 30 feet in a combat round. 1 attack, damage by weapon, anywhere from 2 to 16 in an encounter, or up to 60 in a tribal group. They save like a normal man, which means they have the worst save profile in the game. They have a morale of only 7 or 9 if their leaders are present. And, kind of a little bit below average intelligence in 9. And they are chaotic. All right, so goblins live underground in caves and caverns, have well-developed infravision, 90-foot range. Full daylight, they fight with a penalty of -1 on their attack rolls. Send hunting parties out at night to scavenge food and attack poorly defended groups of humans. Now, there's a 20% chance that when goblins are encountered outdoors, 1 of every 4 will be riding a direwolf. And goblins hate dwarves and will attack them on sight. Now in the lair, there's a goblin king who has 15 hit points and fights as a 3 hit dice monster and gains a +1 bonus to damage rolls. Goblin King has a bodyguard of 2d6 goblins who fight as 2 hit dice monsters and have 2d6 hit points each. The king and his bodyguards may fight in full daylight without a penalty. Goblin morale is 9 rather than 7 as long as their king is with them and still alive. Now, what this morale is, that's referring to a 2d6 roll. And in a combat round, the monsters are supposed to roll morale at the top of every round. And if they roll equal to or below their morale score, they keep fighting. If they roll above their morale score, they give up. So that's why the morale is only 7 if they don't have a king present. So they're only likely to stay in the fight a little more than half the time. If it looks like they're getting overwhelmed, they're very quick to cut and run. But if the king is around, they will stay a little bit longer. But if they still are getting overwhelmed, even if the king is there, the goblins ultimately are going to be like, "Nope, king, you're on your own. See ya, I'm out of here." And they run. All right. Now we go to AD&D or First Edition. And so goblins, now we see the number in a lair goes all the way up to as high as 400 in a lair. They're armor class 6. They have 1 to 7 hit points. They're 40% of the time in lair. 1 attack, 1 to 6 with a claw or by weapon type. They have low intelligence. They're small. Tribal society, the strongest ruling the rest, allowing fealty to the Goblin King. Possible goblins are... Now, here's an interesting thing. From back in First Edition, it said it's possible goblins are distantly related to kobolds. Why? Because, like the latter, goblins enjoy dwelling in dismal surroundings, although they tend to inhabit caves and similar underground places in preference to any habitation above ground. They hate full daylight and attack at a -1 when in sunlight. Goblins have normal infravision, 60-foot range. Okay, original D&D they had 90-foot infravision. Now in AD&D they only have 60. So for every 40 goblins there will be a leader and 4 assistants who are equal to orcs, each having 7 hit points and attacking as monsters with a full hit die. 200 or more goblins, there will be the following additional figures: a sub-chief and 2 to 8 guards, each fighting as hobgoblins and having 8 hit points, AC 5, dealing 1d8 damage. 25% chance that any force will have 10% of its strength mounted on huge wolves. Also be 10 to 40 of these creatures without riders. In a lair, there's also a chief and 2d8 bodyguards. There's females and young, equal to 60 and 100% respectively of the number of male goblins encountered. And a goblin lair will be protected by 5 to 30 huge wolves, not less than 60% at a time. And there's a 20% chance that bugbears are there. And then it even gives a breakdown of how they are armed. So 10% will have short sword and military pick, 10% short sword and sling, 10% short sword and spear, 10% sling only, 20% morning star, 10% military pick, and 30% with a spear. So they're fair miners. They're able to note new or unusual construction 25% of the time. They hate gnomes and dwarves and will attack them in preference to any other creature. All goblins are slave takers and fond of torture. So they speak their own goblin language. They speak lawful evil, kobold, orcish, and hobgoblin. And now take a look at this description. They range from yellow through dull orange for their skin color to brick red. And then their eyes are reddish to lemon yellow. They dress in dark leather gear, and their garments tend toward dull, soiled-looking colors. And they reach to the age of about 50. So we're starting to see a little bit more about goblin culture here in First Edition. Now in Second Edition, the stat block here gets a little bit more detailed. So in an encounter group, you'll run into anywhere from 4 to 24 goblins. AC 6, movement is 6 squares or 30 feet. Hit dice 1 - 1. We were still using THACO or THACO, however you want to say it, in Second Edition, and so it took a 20 to hit an armor class 0. Morale is average of a 10. And I think by this time you were rolling morale. By Second Edition, you were rolling morale on a d20. So small, evil humanoids could be merely pests if not for their great numbers. And now we're here in their description. They have flat faces, broad noses, pointed ears, wide mouths, small sharp fangs, forehead sloped back, eyes are usually dull and glazed. Always walk upright, but their arms hang down almost to their knees. Skin colors range from yellow through any shade of orange to a deep red. Usually a single tribe has members all of about the same skin color. And their eyes vary from bright red to a gleaming lemon yellow. Goblin speech is harsh, pitched higher than that of humans. In addition to their own language, some goblins can speak the kobold, orc, and hobgoblin tongues. Alright, now, goblin speech is harsh and pitched higher than that of humans. Where have you heard that before? Well, if you played video games anytime between 2004 and the present, chances are you've probably spent at least a hot minute in World of Warcraft. If you have, you know that every goblin in that game has a voice that's about like this. And so it's very clear that whoever decided that that's how goblins were going to sound in World of Warcraft probably was influenced by D&D. And probably read this description of what their speech is like. Alright, so again, they hate sunlight. They have a penalty when they're fighting. Goblin strategies and tactics are simple and crude. They're cowardly and will usually avoid face-to-face fight. More often than not, they'll attempt to arrange an ambush on their foes. And they can use any sort of weapon, but they prefer those that require little training, like spears and maces. Now, again, it talks about they mainly live in caves and underground dwellings. Now, the few tribes that do live above ground are found in ruins and are only active at night or in very dark, cloudy days. Use no form of sanitation, and their lairs have a foul stench. Goblins seem to be somewhat resistant to the diseases that breed in such filth. So, live a communal life, sharing large common areas for eating and sleeping. Only leaders have separate living spaces. All the possessions are carried with them. Property of the tribe is kept with the chief and sub-chiefs. Most of the goods are stolen, although they do manufacture their own garments and leather goods. Goblin tribe, again, we see that 40 to 400 adult male warriors. And then it has the breakdown of the different subtypes of goblins, as well as the females and young, yada yada. Chances that they'll be on wargs with unmounted wargs, and wargs will be guarding the lair. Addition of the males, adult females equal to 60%. Goblin tribe has exact pecking order. Each member knows who is above him and who is below him. They fight amongst themselves constantly to move up the social ladder. They often take slaves both for food and labor. Tribe will have slaves of several races, numbering 10 to 40% of the size of the tribe. Slaves are always kept shackled and are staked to a common chain when sleeping. Goblins hate most of their humanoids, gnomes and dwarves in particular, and work to exterminate them whenever possible. And then it talks even a little bit about the ecology. They live about 50 years. They don't need to eat much, but they kill for the pleasure of it. They eat any creature from rats and snakes to humans. And in lean times, they will eat carrion. And then again, it talks about how they are decent miners, detecting new or unusual construction underground 25% of the time, and expanding their habitat with a maze-like network of tunnels. Alright, so let us then go to 3rd edition. So, goblins here in 3rd edition. We now see they have a little bit more hit points. They're 1d8 plus 1. They have an armor class of 15 because now armor class goes the same way it does in 5e, where the higher the armor class, the better. So it's fair. It's not great. And it gives kind of the typical armor that they wear. We also get all the information on their grapple attacks, what their full attack pattern is like, special qualities, their saving throws, ability scores, the skills they have, the feats they have, environment, and then sort of the encounter group, which is a gang, the band, and then the tribe, challenge rating, alignment, and then advancement by character class, level adjustment +0. Okay. And not much is new. So all that about their eyes and skin is very similar to 1E and 2E. And then combat, they're being bullied by bigger, stronger creatures have taught goblins to exploit what few advantages they have: sheer numbers and malicious ingenuity. Concept of a fair fight is meaningless in their society. They favor ambushes, overwhelming odds, dirty tricks, and any other edge they can devise. So this is a thing that's always quite a bit of fun here for us to talk about in the Monster Monday. Okay, sorry, I lost my place. All right. They have a poor grasp of strategy, cowardly by nature, tending to flee the field if a battle turns against them. Proper supervision, they can implement reasonably complex plans, and their numbers can be a deadly advantage. Okay, Goblin Society, tribal, and leaders are the biggest, strongest, or the smartest of the group sometimes. No privacy. Live wherever they can, from dank caves to dismal ruins. Lairs are always smelly and filthy due to another lack of sanitation. Settle near civilized areas to raid for food, livestock, tools, weapons, and supplies. And then once a tribe has despoiled a locale, it simply packs up and moves to the next convenient area. Now, in 3rd edition, that was the first time that they really talked about giving you an idea of how you could modify this monster to be a playable character or a PC. And they tend to be rogues or fighters. Goblin clerics worship Maglubiet. And that's going to be important in a future episode of this series when we talk about the culture and the religion of goblins, and more about their society. All right, and then gives racial traits for their if you decide to roll up a goblin character, and then favored classes, and then all of their other racial features. Okay, so that is 3rd edition Monster Manual. But in 3rd edition, we also learned about another type of goblin that was in the rule books, and this is the Dekanter Goblin. It's a medium-sized monstrous humanoid, and it has a gore attack. They bear little resemblance to the small, cowardly humanoids from which they are created. They're vicious, cunning opponents with large, rhino-like horns. They stand 4 to 5 feet tall. They come in squads or troops, and sometimes there are gargoyles with a troop. They have AC 15, 2d8 plus 4 hit points. They are 4 to 5 feet tall and usually at least 4 feet wide, so they're very squat and bulky. And they have a fast healing feature, which means that they heal 3 points of damage every round as long as they have at least 1 hit point. So it's kind of like a regenerating goblin. It's a little bit like a goblin crossed with a rhinoceros crossed with a troll, if that would not be terrifying. Now, in the realms, this source, I should tell you, is the Monsters of Faerun compendium that came out for 3rd edition. And in the mines of Dekanter, west of the Great Desert, Anarok, in the foothills of the Grey Peak Mountains, there are the only known ruins from the long-lost empire of Netheril. They once served as a major source of iron for that empire and later became a secure laboratory for magical experimentation. In the millennia since the fall of Netheril, magic has faded from the mines and they are now overrun by goblins and gargoyles. But there's one powerful spellcaster who remains in those depths, an Alhoon, which is a type of lich. Anybody who remembers from last week will recall that the Alhoon is in fact a Mind Flayer lich. And he calls himself the Beast Lord. The purpose of this lich's fiendish schemes is unknown, but his creations include the Dekanter goblins, and they're becoming increasingly common in the surrounding mountain areas. So, this gives us another preview of something that we're going to look at in future episodes, which is basically how you can build an entire campaign for your characters where the primary antagonists are goblins and goblin allies. So the goblins, the creatures that work with goblins, the creatures that control goblins, and the creatures that enslave and experiment on goblins. So we're going to look at how that works in a future episode, so that it talk about, just a few little things that you can look at for how you might use this monster as a consistent antagonist all the way from the first level of experience all the way to 20th level. In a 5e campaign. All right, now we're going to look at the 4th edition monster manual, and this is where we really begin to see the diversity of goblins. In the goblin entry, they actually talk about the 3 major types of goblins. They talk about bugbears, they talk about actual goblins, and they talk about hobgoblins. But we are going to just sort of skip over the bugbears and hobgoblins, and we're going to focus on the goblin entries, because 4e really kind of gets your mind thinking about the different ways you can modify goblins if you want to have, basically an enemy culture for your players to face off against. Now, goblins are wicked, treacherous creatures that love plunder and cruelty. They're not big or strong, but they're dangerous when they gang up. Breed quickly, and they can live almost anywhere from caves to the ruins to a city's sewers. Survive by raiding and robbery, taking every usable item they can carry from their victims. Now, what I want to look at is I want to look at how many different types of goblins they created for 4th edition. And this is just in the first monster manual. This is not all of the other supplements that they created for 4e. So you have a goblin cutter, which is a minion. And those of you who have seen other episodes will know that in 4e, a minion, no matter what its level is, it always has only 1 hit point. It hits pretty hard, and but it only has 1 hit point, and its primary role in a battle is to basically soak up resources and potentially do some early damage to the PCs, while the PCs are wading in to try to find the main enemies in the encounter. Then there's the Goblin Blackblade, which is a level 1 lurker. This one has 25 hit points and a bloodied value of 12. So in combat advantage, the Blackblade deals an extra 1d6 damage against any target it has combat advantage against. And all of the goblins use Goblin Tactics, which is when they are missed by a melee attack, they can shift 1 square. And then there's a sneaky thing. When shifting, a Goblin Blackblade can move into a square occupied by an ally of its level or lower. Ally shifts into Blackblade's previous square as a free action. So it's basically like, oh, nope, hit this guy instead of me, is basically what they're doing. Goblin Warrior is a level 1 skirmisher. This guy has a little bit better AC of 17, hit 29 hit points. It has now some more weapons. The first guy just had, first couple of guys just had their short swords. This guy gets a spear, a javelin, and it gets the ability to do a mobile ranged attack. So he can move up to half its speed. At any point during that movement, it makes a ranged attack without provoking an opportunity attack. So, great position. If the warrior ends its move at least 4 squares away from its starting point, it deals an extra 1d6 damage on its ranged attacks until the start of its next turn. So then again, the Goblin Tactics. Now, Goblin Sharpshooter. Now we have a level 2 artillery. So he's got 31 hit points. And he's got the short sword and a hand crossbow. And he's got a sniper ability. Hidden Goblin Sharpshooter misses with a ranged attack, remains hidden. And he's got the combat advantage. It deals an extra 1d6 damage against any target that has combat advantage on. So it's kind of like a rogue's sneak attack damage. Then there's the Goblin Hexer, which is a level 3 controller. AC 17, 46 hit points. It's got the Hexer Rod, so that's a magical, I guess beam weapon or something like that. A Blinding Hex, and a Stinging Hex, and a Vexing Cloud. And then it can incite Bravery. Range 10, targeted ally can shift 2 more squares and make an attack. Has the Goblin Tactics and leads from the rear. The Goblin Hexer can change the attack's target to an adjacent ally of its level or lower. And then the Goblin Skull Cleaver is a level 3 brute with 53 hit points. And he has a battle axe and he has a bloody rage. So he's kind of like the barbarian of goblins. And then we have a Goblin Underboss, which is a level 4 elite controller. And this guy has 110 hit points, armor class of 18, short sword, superior Goblin Tactics. The Underboss and up to 2 allies within its line of sight can shift 1 square. And Survival Instinct. Goblin Underboss gains a +3 bonus to defenses while bloodied. And so then we have, there's 1, there's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 7 different types of goblins that they created for 4th edition that range from 1st level to 4th level monsters. Now, of course, in 5e, monsters don't have levels. Monsters have challenge ratings. It's not a one-to-one correlation what those were. In fact, we can take a look at the end of this whole Goblin section where they put the encounter groups together. And this is a group for a party of a specific level. So in 4e, they suggested that for a level 1 party, you put 2 Goblin Warriors, 2 Fire Beetles, and a Goblin Blackblade. A level 3 encounter would be 2 goblin sharpshooters, 4 goblin warriors, and 4 goblin cutters, and then so on and so on and so on. And so you can see that even at level 5, they would throw 12 of those minions, 12 goblin cutters in there, because it's like, a level 5 party can survive some of those attacks, but it's likely that at least some of those cutters are going to get in and deal damage before they can be wiped out by the party, even though they each have only one hit point. All right, so now in 5e, the familiar goblin, armor class 15, 7 hit points. They're small, black-hearted humanoids that lair in despoiled dungeons and other dismal settings. Individually weak, they gather in large numbers to torment other creatures. Now, I know you're going to say, but wait a minute, didn't Volo's Guide to Monsters have a whole bunch more on goblin culture? Yes, it did. And that's not going to be what we talk about in this episode. We're going to talk about that in a future episode of this series. So, I am aware of that. I have done some research on that, and we will be talking about that later on. Now, they do give us some information about goblins here, kind of goblin lore. Malicious glee, they're motivated by greed and malice. Goblins can't help but celebrate a few times they have the upper hand. They dance caper with sheer joy when victory is theirs. Once their revels have ended, goblins delight in the torment of other creatures and embrace all manner of wickedness. Goblins are ruled by the strongest or smartest among them. A goblin boss might command a single lair, while a goblin king or queen, who's nothing more than a glorified goblin boss, rules hundreds of goblins. Now, challenging lairs, they festoon their lairs with alarms designed to signal the arrival of intruders. Lairs are also riddled with narrow tunnels and bolt holes that human-sized creatures can't navigate, but that goblins can crawl through with ease. They are rat keepers and wolf riders. They have an affinity for rats and wolves, raising them to serve as companions and mounts respectively. And then worshippers of Maglubiet. Maglubiet the Mighty One, the Lord of the Depths and Darkness, is the greater god of goblinoids, envisioned by most goblins as an 11-foot-tall battle-starred goblin with black skin and fire erupting from his eyes. He's worshipped not out of adoration, but out of fear. Goblins believe when they die in battle, their spirits join the ranks of Maglubiet's army on the plain of Acheron. This is a privilege that most goblins dread, fearing the Mighty One's eternal tyranny even more than death. And then the Goblin Boss. Okay, so in 5e, the Garden Variety Goblin is a CR 1/4 monster. The Goblin Boss is a CR 1 monster. And better armor class, 3 times the hit points, multiple attacks, scimitar and javelin attacks, and can redirect the attacks. So basically it can do that thing where it shoves a goblin in the way when somebody attacks it. So that is kind of a survey of the evolution of goblins proper and how goblins have been viewed throughout the various editions of D&D. Okay, so we are going to go back here, and now we are going to talk a little bit about what is coming up in the future parts of this series. Okay, so part 2, we're going to talk about goblinoids. So we're going to dig more in depth into the history of bugbears and hobgoblins, and we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the downright strange goblinoids that have popped up from time to time in different editions of the game. Then we are going to look in part 3 at goblinoid culture, religion, and deities. Then that will be sort of where we expand on goblin society and the role that, how you can think about creating whole sort of civilizations of goblins. And if you want to have like a goblin empire or something like that, that would be in a homebrew game world that you have. And then in part 4, we'll talk about building a campaign around goblinoid enemies. So having those goblinoid enemies be a feature in your game that is a constant antagonist for your players, all the way from level 1 through level 20. And in doing so, we're also going to pull in lore from other IPs. We're going to go and talk about goblins that come from places like World of Warcraft, from places like Magic the Gathering, from other types of video games, from other literary sources. We're going to think about how you can draw on those influences and sort of reskin other monsters to be different types of goblins. And we'll probably go back and look at what they did in 4E with having many different variations of the same monster that were right in the monster manual that could be easily plucked out and used. And we'll kind of talk about how you can mimic that in 5th edition when you want to build like a larger cast of different types of goblins that can make your campaign a little more interesting, instead of, oh man, we're fighting goblins again. It's like, oh well, but these goblins are a little bit different because they do these things and those goblins do those things, and yada yada yada. All right, so that is going to do it for part 1. I'm looking at the chat, and I don't see any questions right now, so I'm going to go ahead into the wrap-up, and I'll briefly look at the chat again and see if there are any questions. And if you think about anything you'd like to make sure that we talk about in some of those future episodes, put those in the questions as well right now. That would be very helpful. Okay, I have been DM Galabond, and Monday night we always do the Monster Monday, but I'm here 3 other days a week with my friends playing D&D. We do on Sunday a 5e planeswalking game, Sundays 2 p.m., called The Walker of Waterdeep. We just had our 89th session yesterday, so we're coming up within the next couple of months. We're probably going to hit, I think, probably by June, we will get to our 100th episode. And I say by June, and probably because, the professional soccer leagues haven't released their schedules yet. And as a season ticket holder, I really missed going to games last year. So I'm going to try to go to some games this year and get out to the stadium and enjoy it, especially now that we're starting to be able to get vaccinations. So I'm going to, we may have some weeks that we miss some of our games. So I think by June or July, we should be hitting our 100th session in that game. Then we have the Sword Coast Chronicles on Thursday nights at 8 p.m. That is a 5e survey of the published campaigns out of D&D 5e. They right now they have just crossed over from the storyline of Out of the Abyss into the storyline for Curse of Strahd. So they are in Barovia, and we'll see how that treats them on Thursday night at 8 p.m. And then on Saturday, we're about to wrap up the Lost Mine of original D&D. We're actually in the final complex, and they have just discovered the lair of the final boss at the end of the session on Saturday night. So I think we'll have at least one more session of a big, huge fight, and then maybe another session or two of clearing out the rest of this complex, and then sort of winding down what happens to these characters at the end of this group. And then we will start some sessions where the players will tell me what they want to do next. And we will talk about whether we stay with the old rule set like we've been, whether we do something more recent, and whether we do it more as something that's homebrew, or whether we would like to explore, like a series of modules or a campaign arc that has been published somewhere. So we will be doing that on Saturday nights. And all of the live stream stuff you can find on twitch.tv/Galabon. The archives of all of the live streams are on YouTube, and everything up there is current except for yesterday's Walker of Waterdeep session. I haven't put that up yet. Then if you want to help us be able to do more stuff, there's a Patreon. And we would love to have some folks help us out over there. All right, well, that is going to do it for tonight. Thank you all for stopping by. Hope you have enjoyed part 1 of our look into the history of goblins in D&D, and we hope that you will join us in future weeks as we talk a little bit more about goblins. And as I always say, as we close out, remember to watch out for the monsters under the bed. Good night, everybody.